very interesting facts about the Victorian era, but there's also some very unusual facts, and I wanted to concentrate a little bit on them today. So here's a few of the more unusual, interesting facts. Now, water was very hard to come by in the Victorian era. Healthy water, that is. It was very hard to come by with the hygiene issues that made themselves prevalent early on. So it was actually common practice that a lot of the time people would drink beer instead of water, and it was more encouraged to actually drink something that they knew was healthy, and that practice even went over to the children. So it wasn't uncommon to see children with pint glasses in the hand. Now, when you think of the Victorian era, normally you would think of things like being very proper, being very well mannered, being very meek, and not taking a few steps into the extreme. You would firmly stay put. But Queen Victoria's son once went to Jerusalem and he came home with a tattoo, and people followed suit from there to the point where over 100,000 people actually wound up trying to get tattoos as well. And they weren't these very small, not noticeable tattoos. They were often motifs, flowers, Japanese sakura flowers, and they even had faces tattooed on the bodies as well. And it was a sign that you were following something a bit higher. The Victorians would often wear a lot of black due to the pollution in the city around them. It was just so much easier to wear a darker colour so that it would hide smoke stains, things like that. And that kind of leads me on to my next fact, which is a lot of women would wear dresses that were very big. Thus, sometimes they would actually get stuck in the houses. And not only that, most of the dresses involved crinoline, which was highly flammable, which meant that they obviously couldn't stand too close to fires due to the risk of, catching fire. A belief during the Victorian era was that eating in the darkness would help aid indigestion, which is something that people found out over time, and they found pictures, portraits where people would be eating in dining rooms, and the dining rooms would be completely cast into darkness. Things such as hypnotism, divination, they were very popular amongst people in the Victorian era. Therefore, there was a lot of events, and people would come to have the futures read, and they would interact with loved ones, they would be hypnotised, things like that were very popular, and they brought in a lot of money, which meant that amongst a lot of people that probably meant well by doing it and they believed in what they were doing, there was actually a lot of fraudsters out there as well, and very well paid actors that would fool a lot of people. Victorian women who were mourning would actually wear small bottles, and when they cried they would catch their tears in the bottles, and it was widely a practice that when the tears evaporated, that was the one time that their mourning came to an end. The final fact that I would like to talk about is women's corsets. Now, the corsets that women wore in the Victorian era it's almost a certainty that people wouldn't be able to wear them today in the same way. Victorian corsets were made to cinch in the waist of the wearer to at least 16 inches in most cases, which was obviously bone-crushingly uncomfortable. but this was a fashion statement and it was highly expected in those times. And it led to a lot of medical problems. And just a little bit of an idea would be trouble breathing, eating problems, and in some circumstances, there would be problems with giving birth. Um, so we've looked at a few facts today, and it just goes to show, it's, when you look at things like Victorian people getting tattoos and the beliefs and the things that they enjoyed, such as the hypnotism and trying to speak to people from beyond the grave, it does show that this image that you would first see when you thought of a Victorian person would be very prim and very proper. It's actually, it could be quite the opposite. It took people to be able to wind down because there were so many very high expectations of what they should be and what they should do. So they had to follow them to the letter. But when they got a chance to actually be at home and be amongst friends and family, they could be themselves, and sometimes that meant a little bit of a difference in the way they would come across, but it was their truth. It was the way that they were supposed to be, and I just find that very interesting.